Okay, welcome to this edition of our Digital Academy session. I'm here with Philippa White. My name's Verity Taylor. I'm Pro Bono Manager at Mishcon, and today we are talking about Philippa's book, Return on Humanity, which is now an international bestseller. Very exciting. And Philippa is the CEO of Thai Leadership.
Thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here.
Thank you, Philippa. Should we go straight into it? I know we've been talking about the book and I've been so excited to do this. So I was talking about the fact that, as Pro Bono Manager at Mishcon, the book really resonated with me. But there was this one really lovely example in the book that I really wanted you to speak to. And it was all about people needing to create connections by not only asking questions, but by listening to the answers.
Yeah.
And it really resonated because I do find with lawyers that they're very solutions focused, which is great because they want to run in and they want to fix something. Yeah. I find that particularly when there is something happening in the world and I get the call saying, Verity, what can I do? Let's do this. I've got a project. Let's go. And I'm like, let's just hold on. Let's just wait and see what the best thing to do. And sometimes, they do like to barrel in. So I'd love you to tell us.
Yeah, the story. Yeah, so I am going to look at my phone where I have saved it, but just to sort of introduce it, I think what you're talking about is sometimes and I am definitely guilty of this, we don't always stop to really think about how we're going to show up, how we show up for something. And if we have, this amazing idea, and if you're a very passionate person, and if you're type A, where you sort of kind of bull in a china shop kind of approach, sometimes it's hard to think about the other stakeholders in that situation. And in my book, I quite like bringing to life many of these concepts with stories. Because we can say this kind of thing. I think we can all relate to it. I mean, there's a number of times where I'm sure I've had this really strong idea about something and I've sort of gone in and then it just hasn't really worked as well as it maybe could have. And you think, they didn't understand, it's them. And then you think, well, actually, maybe it was me. Maybe I didn't approach that in the best possible way. And we can have those kind of conversations, but sometimes it's easier to bring it to life with a story. And obviously that story resonated. So let me just read it. A group of Italian engineers were keen to teach Zambian people how to grow food. They arrived with Italian seeds in southern Zambia in a beautiful valley that stretched to the Zambezi River. And they started to teach the local people how to grow Italian tomatoes and zucchinis and other vegetables. The thing was that the local people really weren't that interested, and the Italians just couldn't understand why. It was such a fertile valley and nothing was being grown. In the Italians' minds, the Zambians were really missing out. They demonstrated to the Zambians just how easy it all was and how lucky they were to have this input from the Italians, thinking, thank God we're here, just in the nick of time to save the Zambian people from starvation. But one fateful day, it all became clear. When all the food was ready to eat, beautiful red tomatoes and gorgeous zucchinis, 200 hippos came out of the river and ate everything. My God, the hippos! Exclaimed the Italians. Yep, that's why we have no agriculture here, said the Zambians. Well, why didn't you tell us? Asked the Italians. Well, because you never asked, said the Zambians. And I think, when we reflect on, again, how we show up, but also how do we create trust and connection when we're trying to, initiate anything really. And I think it's also, it's reading between the lines, and it's creating those connections and bringing people along for the ride. And if we just bombard people and just expect people to be as excited as we are about something, it's not always going to happen. And it's not always the fault of the other people. And so that's why I do like that, because I think it's something when we know how important collaboration is, we know how important it is to be able to create, unlikely partnerships and to come up with solutions for something, in a vacuum doesn't really work. We need to be able to engage other people, but then we just need to think, what is the best way of doing that? And I think it's just checking ourselves sometimes and just being aware of how we're showing up and just ensure that, we're bringing people along in the best way possible.
Being a little bit humble sometimes about, what knowledge we have, but what we don't have as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that story. And I love the way the book is full of stories. It's so engaging and it just brings the whole thing to life.
Well,
it's just so easy to read because you just go from one story to another
Well, thank you. And I think that's, I do enjoy reading business books. I tend to read them more just because I have a podcast and I do interview a lot of people who write books. But you can get really dull business books. And at the end of the day, if you're wanting to try and get a point across, I think we all relate more to stories than frameworks and theories. And at the end of the day, it's return on humanity. It's a human business book. And I think if you can try and do that through stories, it just makes it more relatable. And also I didn't want to be too prescriptive with the book, in the sense that I think a lot of business books can sort of say, well, it's my way of thinking and therefore you should be doing this. And, I had to get 60 permissions for publishing the book, and on purpose. It's leadership lessons from all corners of the world, and the thinking really is, this isn't my thinking. It's actually, a lot of people have contributed to this, and it just goes to show that there's many people from many sectors, from many parts of the world, who are all coming to the same conclusion. And literally from Mishcon de Reya, obviously we're talking about you guys, to Octopus Group, to an amazing organization in Zambia, to another organization in Tanzania. So it's
really
very
important to bring together all of those different ideas in one place, because sometimes, like you say, we might not all read 60 business books, but to bring it all together
into one place is, exactly. Yeah.
And something really accessible as well.
Yeah, and that was the idea. So I'm happy that you felt that too.
Something else that really resonated was how you talk about having the courage to be imperfect. And I think it's interesting sort of following that example, because that's about the enthusiasm and and that's wonderful. But in that you need that wonder, and how do you reignite wonder for those who perhaps have lost it a little bit? The example I'm thinking of at a law firm is, the more senior you get, and particularly in the pro bono world, you sometimes find that there's these really senior lawyers, but the more senior they get, they're more specialised in one little area and they are the absolute expert. So to try and get them out of their comfort zone is a little bit harder than actually the more junior lawyers who are sort of fresh out of law school and do have that wonder. So yeah, I guess the point is, how do you reignite that wonder, and particularly with our leaders and the more senior?
It's a really good question. And I actually see it working in two ways. One is having that wonder and that curiosity. And one is being able to be vulnerable. And I think they actually almost go hand in hand. I think as children, we have children, right? So we learn a lot from our children. But it's amazing how children just constantly ask questions. Why this, mommy? Why this? And it's really annoying. Yeah, okay, because I said so. But at the same time, it's well, why is it like that? And then you're sort of, oh God, I haven't really thought of that. I need to try and explain that. But as we get older, we ask so many less questions. And why is that? Because actually, how we learn and how we grow is by going into situations that are different and meeting with people that are different to us, and having those different types of conversations. And it can be anything from being in an Uber and having a conversation with the Uber driver, who probably will have some interesting stories to tell, and just asking questions. But also if you see things from different people within the business that are doing things, like involving different people and asking questions. But to be able to ask questions, or actually just going back to being curious, it's reading things that you wouldn't normally read, or it's going to maybe a place that you wouldn't normally go to. And again, I think it is just pushing ourselves out of our comfortable world to be able to open our minds. And children are very good at that. But the more specialized and the more expert you become, the more narrow focused you become. And again, so that kind of brings me to vulnerability, because I think the more expert you become, the more people go to you for solutions. And you become quite comfortable in that position of being the expert. And it becomes more uncomfortable to have doubt and to say, I don't know. But actually, we also know that many of the solutions within a business come from the younger people who have completely different ways of seeing things, or who have different perspectives. And it's so important to tap into that. And I think having that doubt and reminding ourselves that doubt is actually really important. And actually, just because you're a law firm, in the justice system, you have, reasonable doubt. But what about unreasonable certainty?
Absolutely.
Right? Jim Carroll actually said that. He's one of my advisors. And I love that, because I just think maybe having complete certainty is unreasonable. But it takes strength to be able to say, I don't know. And actually, if you reflect on, like, what are the pros and cons to having complete certainty about something, or being able to say, I don't know. And if you're in a really, senior position, and you might not know. And actually, you might need to draw in other people's opinions. And to be able to do that takes strength, but it also creates connection. And it creates space for younger people to be able to grow into, to be able to prove to you, or even to themselves, that they actually have an opinion about this. And to have that strength to be able to draw that out of other people empowers them, gets more ideas going, shows that you probably don't know everything, because I think it's impossible to know everything. And actually, it's interesting, because with the work that we do take pretty senior individuals into situations that are quite different. We do it virtually, we do it in person, but they have to solve an issue that is very different to what they're used to, pushing themselves in different situations. And in order to find those solutions, they are working they're using the skills that they know, but in a very different context. And they're having to work with people who are could be in Malawi, and they have a very specific objective, and they have sort of 30 days to kind of find the solution. But it is impossible for somebody who's grown up in London to suddenly arrive in Malawi and have all the answers. Like, that's just impossible. And actually, many times you need to be able to get conversations going with the beneficiaries of an organization. And you have to really kind of go out to the communities and sort of bring in voices from other places to be able to even start to kind of understand the context. But it's quite funny how often it takes a good number of weeks. I'll often get to sort of the third week of one of our programs, and I'll have somebody call me and say, I still haven't unearthed the big idea. I'm still just not sure what it's going to be. And again, it can be virtual or it can be in person. And I'll often say, so have you said like you don't know? And have you gone to the beneficiaries and like spoken to the people in the communities to kind of understand what it is that, how to unearth that? And you're like, no, because I feel like I need to go with an idea to the organization. I need to come with a solution, but I just don't know what the solution is. And I was like, but why are you calling me? Tell them that you don't know, and then ask them to put you in touch with people. No, but I can't say that I don't know. I'm like, well, why not? Because you don't know. And then finally, it's so extraordinary, because the moment that they kind of let those barriers down, admit to the fact that they don't know, and actually they then go and speak to, the local people and bring in those voices, suddenly everything just happens. And then, an amazing solution is found. And it's unbelievable the number of times that people go back into their day-to-day jobs and they realize, God, you know what? I need to ask more questions. I need to involve other people. I can't be making decisions in a vacuum, because that's, God, it's so much better. And it's funny because you can't really teach people that with a PowerPoint presentation. It's like you need
Yeah.
people to actually experience that.
Yeah, like
and
that sort of
recognize-
experiential learning where they sort of.
Yeah.
I think we've all had it though, haven't we? Where we're like, yeah, we're going over and over and over, and then it's always when you have a dialogue with someone and you say, I've got this problem, I don't know, and then it's always that they even have to. It's not they're giving you the answer. It's just that dialogue gives you a different way of thinking about an issue.
Totally. It's so powerful, right? And you're right. And even when you're having a bad day, I mean, we all have bad days, and you're sort of feeling in a slump and you're sort of stuck in your own head. And then the moment you pick up the phone and talk to somebody, even if it's not even about that thing, but you just have a different kind of conversation and you just open your mind, or you listen to a podcast, or you do a podcast, or you have a conversation, suddenly your energy levels change, right? And you suddenly have a different viewpoint about things. And I think we need to find ways to do that and have that wonder and have that kind of just desire to kind of open our minds. And when we do that,
and be more vulnerable, because I guess that is at the heart of it, isn't it? That we all feel we want to know the answers, and everyone needs to think that we know what we're doing all the time. And yes, but it's quite hard sometimes for, I imagine, senior leaders particularly to be vulnerable.
Yeah, but it's a strength, right?
Can you tell me a bit more about the Thai leadership program? Because I think that's really interesting, and how people come to it. Because, you know, are the people who are coming to the Thai leadership the people who are always going to be engaged socially? I guess I'm wondering how people come to it and how it changes them.
Yeah, God, that's...
And how do we reach the people who should be on this, but perhaps wouldn't put themselves forward?
Yeah, okay, so that last question is actually really interesting. So we work with different types of companies, you know, so banks like Santander to ad agencies. We've got a program right now with Leo Burnett, the London agency, you know, investment companies. So loads of different skill sets. And we do it in a number of different ways. So it can be, as I mentioned, that people can go to a place. So the experience is around 6 months, but they're only out of the office for 30 days. But again, it's a very immersive experience where you sort of are 100% kind of on your own with the security net of Thai, kind of the process taking you through it, but you're really in it. And then there's a cohort opportunity, which is virtual, 2 hours a day over 6 weeks, but coming together as a group of people around a business. That's what's happening with Leo Burnett now. So you've got, you know, 6 people from around the London agency coming together to solve an issue. 2 hours a day, pretty flexible, but there's kind of key things that happen like international development training, which you would love. So it's super, super interesting. Coaching, and then kind of the Thai process with the objective to coming together to solve a real issue that's facing an organization together in 6 weeks, which is using kind of constraints at the core, because you sort of short amount of time, short amount of money, short amount of human resource. And then we've got another one, which is a really kind of scalable one, which involves up to 500 people, and that runs throughout a year, and it's sort of habitual learning. So it's kind of 1 hour a month. But it's all, the whole idea with what we do, and the way I like to explain it, is it's kind of pushing people to the edge of their mental maps and gently nudging them off, creating kind of an evolution of behavior change for teams and individuals. And the whole idea is to just get people to be seeing themselves in the world differently. So back to your last question, which was, you know, how do you get people excited about this? Well, the way that we do this is by exposing people to real global challenges around the world and exposing them to different realities, different cultures, and getting them to be able to solve a real challenge in a pretty impactful, you know, applicable kind of way. Like they create something amazing at the end of a very short amount of time. So why do people do it? Well, individuals want to do it because it's an opportunity for them to develop competencies and abilities that it's really hard to do that in the day-to-day. So if you were, you know, if we look at the way that most companies function, you need to have silos. As much as we talk about being siloed and the negativity of being in a silo, silos exist for a reason, because it's safe. You know, people fit into an area and their role is important and they kind of fit into the structure of whatever that company is, and then it runs like a sort of well-oiled machine. But at the end of the day, people need to step out of that hierarchy to be able to grow. So we know that people need to find situations that make them uncomfortable. We know that people need to be able to push themselves in different ways. We know that to be able to grow, we need to kind of feel that feeling where our feet aren't quite touching the ground and we're kind of, oh my God. But it's not safe for companies to create those kind of situations in the day-to-day, because actually they need to know for their clients that things are going to work well.
Yeah.
So you need to find opportunities for people to be able to reignite that fire in their belly, for them to be able to do something that speaks to them. So that's where the sort of pro bono stuff comes in. I mean, of course, it's a lot of people are searching for that opportunity to be able to make a difference, if you like. But there's a big part of it of being able to use their skills in a different way, to be able to feel excited about what they know, to be able to try something different, to get stuck into different parts of business that they don't normally have the opportunity to get stuck into, and to be able to say to themselves, like, look at what I know. Like, I was able to create something that's like, I would not normally have the opportunity to create whatever it is that we've created for an organization in Guatemala, and then be able to speak to people in Guatemala. So it's interesting because it is people who are keen to push themselves, keen to learn more about themselves, see themselves in a different way. And definitely to be able to make a difference comes as part of that package, but it's not always like the sort of the main thing. That's definitely part of it, but it's not the only thing. And so, yeah, and it depends on the organization. It depends on the way that we work, and the scalable option is probably less about doing good, but it certainly is more about perspective. And it just sort of depends on which, offering that we have.
I think, again, in the pro bono world, it's similar, which is, we have lots of really passionate people who really, really want to make a difference and give back. But I always say that, you do have to have that win-win, that there has to be, part of it is there's amazing development opportunities and people stepping outside of roles that they, things that they can't do in their day-to-day role, they can do in a pro bono role.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing, because, that they're getting that opportunity as well as giving back is fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing. I mean, we know, Elliot talks about it in my book, Elliot from Mishcon. He talks about the importance of, having these opportunities to expand our perspectives and to have these different perspectives, because at the end of the day, lawyers are expected to make nuanced advice and or give nuanced advice and have these very special relationships with clients where there's empathy involved and understanding and also just knowing how the wider world works to be able to put into context whatever it is the issue is that their client is facing. But if you only hang out with all of the same types of people and you're stuck doing the same sort of thing all the time and you're just living in this very kind of safe bubble, it's really hard to be able to empathize, and it's really hard to be able to advise on nuanced issues if you're not in touch with the rest of society. And that's why these types of opportunities are just so important, because it gives people sort of a window into how the wider world works, and access to people who you wouldn't normally have access to. And then it just makes life and your life just more colorful.
No, absolutely. There's so many examples in the book of how being an empathetic leader, an empathetic company to your employees is so important. And but for profitability, there's some amazing stats on happier and more engaged employees. Their productivity is much higher, and profitability, and all of these examples seem like so obvious that this is what people should be doing. So why aren't more companies
doing
this? Yeah, is my question.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I studied business. I did a business degree, I talk about my business school in the book, and I don't talk negatively about them, but I do talk negatively about business schools, and my experience at business school. And interestingly, I thought that they might be really angry with me about being so vocal about that, but actually they've completely embraced it, and they're now wanting to fly me to do keynote for the incoming grads in September. And I've been on roundtables and keynotes because they're actually wanting me to provoke them, because they recognize that the system is broken And things do need to change. And I think people are starting to recognize that. But, business is currently stuck in this kind of mid 20th century paradigm where people are chanting, like I chanted at business school, the main goal of business is to make money, and only focusing on ROI. And so that's why my book is called Return on Humanity, because actually it does need a bit of a movement and people to actually start shaking things up and saying, so, who is actually teaching about the importance of being more human in business? And when I say that, just to sort of take a bit of a step back, I'm talking about the importance of people tapping into their human assets, is what I like to call them. And it's these softer competencies of empathy and flexibility and vulnerability and cultural intelligence and kindness. And when I actually provoked my university just a couple of weeks ago, and I was on a panel, and I said, so I think it's proven that the more human our leaders are, the more human our corporate cultures are. And I think we can agree that people are looking for more connection and belonging at work. And I think we can agree that customers are looking for more connection with their, the places that they want to do business in. And actually, it's a really good question, just as I go off on a little bit of a tangent, because if we all just stop and think, what are the companies that we relate to, that we genuinely love doing business with, that we genuinely have a connection with? And we come in contact with thousands of companies a day. Now, what are those companies that we rate and we think, God, I really loved doing business with that company? Like, there's not very many. And if you think about the grads that are coming out of university who have their list of companies that they're wanting to work for, the list is tiny when it comes to the companies that they genuinely want to work for. And the power balance is changing, and customers and employees are looking for companies and businesses that they genuinely feel a connection and belonging to. And we need to now recognize that in order to be more competitive, and the stats, for example, more human companies are 32% more competitive. They make more money. So, and employees that are happy are 400% more likely to be more creative and more innovative. Now that makes sense, because if you're happy, if you genuinely feel safe and trusted and empowered and like where you work, you know that you are more likely to be excited about work, and you're going to go into work with ideas, and you're going to spend time thinking about it, and you're going to be coming up with, we know that. We know that because we're human beings and we can relate to that. So if we are creating environments at work that recognize our human employees like human beings and understand how to get the most out of them and create those human cultures. And again, those human cultures are only possible with leaders that understand how to tap into their human assets. And the question is, who is teaching that? And when I provoked my university on that roundtable, the answer was the self-help gurus. And it's like, that's interesting. So the self-help gurus are responsible for basically providing or creating the human competencies that are absolutely vital for driving business into the future. So there's a massive disconnect. And I think this is the reason why I'm excited about this book, because it's creating a movement that I think is necessary. And I think it's reminding all of us that it doesn't matter where we come from, how much money we have, where we fit into society, we all have access to this power. And businesses need to start investing in training that really genuinely can unleash that. And, I do that, but I'm sure there's a whole load of other companies that do it too. And the whole idea is we need to make this a priority. It can't be up to the self-help gurus and for individuals to be investing in their own development. This needs to be something that companies really do need to invest in. You need to make sure that you hire the right people. You have the right management. Mishcon, this is a huge thing that Elliot's super passionate about at Mishcon. And there's a reason for it, because it's competitive. And I think it's just over time, I think more and more companies are going to start recognizing that the old way of doing things, sort of top down type of running a business, cog in a machine, it's just about, make as much money as you can for me and see you later. Like, that's just not the future, because I don't relate to that. And I'm sure there's a whole lot of people who are like, well, why would I do that? Like, there's more to life.
And clients aren't going to relate to that as well. So I think it's interesting, because I think back to my law school days, and, all you're thinking about at law school is learning the black letter law and passing those exams. But when you're getting to trying to get your training contracts and your vacation schemes, you're being interviewed on so much more than just black letter law. It's how you present yourself, how are you going to relate to clients, how are you going to build those networks and relationships are a huge part of that role. But no one's teaching it. So where are we expecting people to learn it?
Right. And it's so crazy, because think about the professionals in your personal life that you deal with, so I, with my work, with my life, like I have, I have to deal with lawyers, I have to deal with accountants, I have to deal with professional services. Without question, the people I hire are the ones who understand me, understand my reality, understand the sort of nuances of my business, of my life, of my kind of setup. And the ones that I deal with who sort of think that they know everything, clearly very smart individuals, but the ones who just don't understand how to tap into kind of the human essence of life, like, you're just not going to have a job for very long with me anyway, because it's like, it just doesn't work. You need to be able to, but it's nuanced, isn't it? And
you can't put your finger on it. It's like anything, I was speaking to a builder about a quote on something, and he was just, a really nice guy and took time out and was very human. And immediately I'm terrible. I'm like, oh, I'll just go with him because he seems so nice. Yeah. Should be going for all different quotes. And absolutely, and I will. But, it makes such a difference when you make a connection with someone and people have that sort of empathy.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I did have another question, which was, I was thinking about this when I was at a pro bono conference a couple of weeks ago. And it struck me before, but it really struck me that day that I looked around the room and over 100 people, probably nearer 200 people, and there was probably count the number of men in the room on two hands. It's a very female-dominated profession, pro bono lawyers and pro bono managers, and I think you see that a lot in the charity sector. And I guess my question is, do women make more empathetic leaders, and would the world be a better place if we had more female leaders?
So, I'm going to plug another book, just because if you're wanting stats around this, it's really worth it. It's called The XX Edge. Now, I did a podcast with Ruth Shaber, I think is her last name. Fascinating. I do touch on it, and interestingly, I didn't know about her when I wrote my book, but there is a part in my book where I do touch on the importance of more female leadership, and that business is proven to be more successful if women are at the table and making decisions. So again, I'm not suggesting that only women need to be in business at all. I'm just saying that it needs to be a gender diverse makeup of a company. And Ruth goes into so much detail in her book about this. So, for example, 90% of the world's wealth is managed by men. 90%. And she actually, with her foundation, she has actually made a point of only investing in businesses that have either women at the table, like that certainly have women at the table, or just women run, or women at the table, and decision makers. So just having some women as decision makers, but she only invests for this fund that she has in these types of companies, and her portfolio has completely outperformed the market.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It's really fascinating. And she said, when women are on boards, when women are managers of money, so portfolio managers of money for investments. So she said most of the portfolio managers are men, and therefore the decisions that they make are a certain type of decision. When women are in charge of money, when women are part of decisions within companies, they are proven, and her book is just basically full of stats. And so in my book, I found some of those stats, which obviously when I spoke to her, I then was like, God, I wish I knew about her before, because I might have made a longer kind of subchapter about this. But I think what's frustrating for me, and you might relate to this, is, I feel lucky, and I'm sure you do too, that you sort of managed to do it all. So you've sort of got your career and you've got your children and you've managed to kind of have, make it all work. But there's a lot of women that I know, highly intelligent women, who didn't. And so, they were the ones to stay home with the kids, Oxbridge graduates, Ivy League. But, they had to take a bit of a step back. They had to, be the one ferrying kids around and looking after the children. And as a result, they really struggled, mostly from a sort of a confidence point of view. And they are starting to get kind of back into the sort of the working world, but again, taking a huge step backwards. And I just find, and really struggling from sort of a confidence point of view. And it really, really upsets me, because I just think the system is not allowing these extraordinary individuals to work within the system. And we do know, unfortunately, for a number of reasons, so much of the family responsibility does tend to fall on women, and that's a whole other conversation. But if we know, and it's proven, if we know that business is more successful with women, if we know that we're just talking about a diverse workforce, we're not saying that they all need to be on board, but we do know that if women are in powerful positions and if they are part of the decision making of that company is more successful. And if we know that, why are companies not then taking into consideration all of these kind of dynamics and making it more possible? And being more flexible and empathetic and just thinking of those dynamics. And women who are running companies, those companies do understand those nuances, and they are more flexible and they are more competitive. And so it's understanding these dynamics. But again, if we know that business tends to be run by men because of the dynamics and the sort of inflexibility, we need to kind of break through that. And it is more competitive.
And I guess it's speaking again to, the win-win, which is that it's such a waste of resource. You're losing this amazing resource.
Right?
And often the companies, they're
it's
losing women
successful.
who they have trained up, or, really valuable resource, and then they're losing them because they don't have the...
And the problem is the problem is twofold. One, it's not flexible. They have responsibilities. They, all the things that we can relate to with our children. But it's also, if it's a male culture, and if it's a culture that is not human, you're going to lose those women, because at the end of the day, they're like, I'm like, life is not worth this. And does that make sense? So I think there's so much more proving that the more we understand the real power of these human assets, the sort of those softer skills that we didn't see as that important before, they are so important because they are proven to make business more successful. And if we only focus on return on investment, you miss out on all of this. And it's not the way forward anymore. I mean, your business is gonna go out of business because it's just not going to be competitive. And just, interestingly, because just as far as examples of companies, and I talk about a number of companies. I mean, I talk about Mishcon as one of them, but I talk about Octopus. That's another one. I talk about First Direct. I mean, First Direct. I love
that bit made me want to switch my bank.
Yeah.
I was like, I have to switch back.
It's the best bank, and it's so funny because I remember when I first moved to London, 2001. Everyone has to go along the high street, and you sort of go in and you book, bank with a bank, and I won't say which name it was, but anyway, I banked with them, and I remember complaining with people and just saying, this sucks. And this was back in the day when you did go in and speak to people, and you did try and call, and people should have answered the phone. And I remember somebody saying to me, you're more likely to separate from your spouse than you are to fire your bank. And I was like, really? Well, I'm firing my bank. I mean, I'm not going to be that statistic. And so, but I needed to find out the best one. And someone said, oh, you need to bank with First Direct. Now, I've been with them since 2002, I guess. And I I absolutely love them. And it's just funny because it's, you know, they pick up with one ring. You speak to somebody, even if it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, they ask you how you are. They talk about their cat. I mean, it's so human. But it's interesting how the company is very human. So they understand that to have great customer service, your employees need to be happy, and they need to be cared for, and they need to feel a part of something, and they need to be working towards this purpose that, you know, whatever it is that your company stands for. And people who work there genuinely love it, and they genuinely feel a part of something. And so that's where a lot of that comes in as well. It's sort of treating your people well, but there needs to be a shared mission. And that shared mission also needs to really work with whatever that mission is that you have in your life. And so I talk about that in my book as well.
And it filters down. It can't just be, oh, we've got great customer service and that's what we're focusing on. It's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a package, right?
Something I want to talk about that you talk about towards the end of the book is the problem with polarities. And it really spoke to me. I think there's been so much going on in the political world.
Yeah.
Over the past 5 years, with Brexit and with American politics, and I feel it's changed. There's been a change in the way we discuss politics, and I've always quite enjoyed discussing politics and been happy and comfortable with people with different political views. But there definitely seems to be this problem that there are such divisive issues now, and people can't even speak about them. And how do we build those bridges? How do we get people to overcome that and connect? Because until we do that, how are we going to
move forward? Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, going into well, you will know this because you come from a political family, but how many people are going to poll? How many countries are going to poll?
I think it's like half the population will be voting
this year.
Yeah. And we are likely in the UK to be having an election around the same time as the US.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, I live in Brazil, so most people, I'm sure, will have heard of Bolsonaro and Lula. My company's based in England, so I'm well aware of Brexit, and my family's British. And then, of course, we've got the American elections, and they are so polarizing. And also, you know, just even with the pandemic and vax or don't vax, and it's complicated because people become very passionate, and you kind of dig your heels in, and you almost identify with one side or the other, and you kind of become these kind of warring tribes, don't you? And I think we just need to, I think it's just one of those things where we need to kind of take a bit of a step back and think, well, first of all, am I completely right? Okay, I have a belief in something, and I have I know my values. And actually, when we're looking at certain politicians, I mean, I know myself, I have similar values to one or the other, and that's fine. You know, I might not like that politician, but at the end of the day, voting for that politician doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who is voting for that politician is that politician or represents everything that individual stands for. And I think it's like what we were talking about earlier, just about, you know, having doubt or asking questions or understanding and putting ourselves, empathizing. And it's so important for us to push ourselves out of our comfort zones and have those uncomfortable conversations. And that's what building bridges is, isn't it? It's kind of talking to someone who might have a completely polarized view to you. And yes, it will be an uncomfortable conversation, and it might not feel great, but there is a reason why 51% of the population is voting in another way to you. And to be honest, you voting in another way doesn't necessarily make you right, because what is right? At the end of the day, if 51% or 49 or whatever these really tight elections are, there are so many reasons why people are voting for whoever that person is. And it's not because they're racist, or it's not because they're machismo or whatever it is. There's so many other subtleties that, do we even understand what they are? And if we don't understand, you know, us playing against other people just makes that other side, it just becomes this kind of warring tribe, and it just sort of ends up having two sides yelling at the other side. And that is not going to be able to create sort of evolution. And I mean, I see this in Brazil because obviously it's very, very polarized. And you have these nasty names of people who vote for Bolsonaro, and you have really nasty names of people who vote for Lula. And then you just basically, no one's talking to one another. And that type of behavior is not progressive. And we really do, in order to be able to make it through the next year, we do need to have those uncomfortable conversations just to be able to understand, because especially if you do work in politics, to understand why people are voting for the other side, you really need to understand why. And I don't know if enough people are having those conversations. I mean, I know a lot of people in politics in Brazil, and they're so vehemently married to their viewpoint and absolutely hate the other side. And they believe they're the owners of the truth. And they believe that they are, they're the smart ones. And anyone who thinks otherwise is stupid. And the thing is, well, that's not going to be very helpful for anyone. And the risk is that, that's going to probably get another party into power, because people are just going to start, it's going to create a lot of, animosity and hatred. And then that doesn't create those bridges. And
yeah,
so
we all focus on
to,
winning and our side.
and our side is better.
Winning. And then if they do, then you're like, great, but then what happens next? What happens at the next election for the people who do feel disenfranchised, or, if we're not having those conversations
and
or
it's
building
just
those
understanding.
bridges?
I mean, and the key really is building bridges, and it's having those conversations, and also just understanding. I mean, and that's why I do think having conversations with Uber drivers is one of, certainly in Brazil, it's fascinating, because you get there's a certain type of population that does tend to vote for one side or the other. And you very quickly start to understand the underlyings of where a lot of these votes are coming from. And that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Because
It also challenges your assumptions when you have these conversations. Because
Totally.
I remember around Brexit and in the lead up having these conversations with taxi drivers, and many being very pro, and many of them being immigrants themselves. And that really made me
fascinating.
really fascinating, and challenge my assumptions on things.
And it's those kind of conversations. And again, at no point in time am I suggesting that having these conversations to sway you one way or the other. That's not it. It's actually just humanizing everything and creating that empathy. And like you say, how is it that an immigrant can vote and get? That's fascinating. And then once you start to understand those nuances, you're like, God, okay, well, I hadn't even considered that. And then how does that then play into other relationships and other conversations that you're having? And it makes everyone kind of come together a little bit more. And it's something we have to remember moving forward, to really try and have those uncomfortable conversations, because if everyone did that, the next 8 months or however many months we have ahead until the end of the year, because it can get really ugly. And is that even the kind of society that we want to live in? And I think just one thing that I do talk about, Simon Anholt, I talk about him in my book, and he has a great book as well, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but anyway, I talk about it in my book. But he does talk about this kind of stuff. And he was saying how, like, when you would buy records or CDs, and you would sort of buy the whole LP, and you didn't necessarily like the whole album, but you bought it. But they were sort of like, basically you bought it for the couple singles, didn't you? Yeah. And it's a bit like that with politics. At the end of the day, you don't buy the entire party. And actually, to become married to a party, I also think is quite dangerous, because it's not that you don't actually identify necessarily with that entire party and everything that it stands for. There's different things that you agree with. And if we see life like that, rather than just being Democrat or just being Republican or just being Bolsonaro or just being Lula or PT, if we start understanding the nuances of what we're voting for, and actually, no, I like that single. And actually, now I understand that's why people are voting for Bolsonaro, not because of everything he represents, but there's a couple of singles in there that actually I'm not completely against. And the more that we start asking those questions, it becomes less about the party and more about whatever it is that they're discussing. And then we can make more informed decisions. And we're not married to one thing or the other. And I think, again, that's where those conversations really come in.
I'm definitely guilty of always voting for the same party. Well, slightly brainwashed.
You do come by it honestly. I don't know how many people understand your background, but it is understand.
I did read that the best voter is the one that's the swing voter who's actually examining the policies each time and making a decision based on different circumstances, rather than just being like, I am tribally Labour or I'm tribally brought up, Tory. That we should.
But it's interesting, just even from what we were talking about earlier. Again, within the parties, it's so important to understand, like, when you have leaders of parties who actually do understand where the world is going and actually those nuanced kind of conversations that, okay, he is Labour or he is PC, whatever, but Conservative, but it's understanding that, no, actually we don't want to go completely to one side. We actually need to be more, right of left, for example. And again, I think it's understanding those nuances, and the way that you get there is through these kind of conversations.
How do you feel looking, to the future with all the challenges that the world is facing? Do you feel optimistic?
Yeah, and you know what? I've just written a book, obviously, on humanity, and I have been. Sorry, on humanity, no, I'll rephrase that. It's, I've just written a book called Return on Humanity. And again, it's leadership lessons from all corners of the world. And writing that book, and obviously doing the research for that book, it was a very positive experience because, as I say, I'm having conversations with so many different business leaders, but also NGOs in different parts of the world and, different sectors and different areas and from different backgrounds. And it was so positive. And then when it started to kind of get to the point of getting the book out there and getting the endorsements and then, getting it ready for the launch, this has really resonated with people in a way that, obviously it resonated with me because I was writing the book and it was a really positive experience. But then I'm seeing the sort of the knock-on effect of these kind of conversations and how people are really resonating with it and really kind of needing it and feeling this hope that I think a lot of people are really needing right now. And then when we launched it last week, it made it to #1 in the US, Canada, Brazil, and the UK. And that on Amazon. But we were the top of 5 categories in Brazil and the top in 4 categories in the UK and the top of 3 in Canada and 1 in the US. Now that to me just showed, God, like there's clearly, this is not just some fly by night kind of conversation. This is something that I think it's really resonating with people. And I think people are really feeling, we've got a lot of people coming to the launch tomorrow, to the launch party. It's sponsored by a company, by Next 15, which I'm going to plug because so kind. But also, it's an investment. And it's also something like, no, but we need people first cultures at companies. It cannot just be focused on the money. The world, and we haven't even touched on this, like the world can't handle it. We need leaders who understand like cause and effect and who understand the power of interdependence. Like we need other people. We need to understand, like if I'm making a decision here, it can impact people there and stakeholders. It's not just about shareholders. We have to take into consideration everything. And the world can't handle anymore. And it kind of feels like this is now. Like the time is now. And it really feels like it's resonating. And I think that's why, because I think people are really wanting that. And I do believe that people are innately good. They are. I just think sometimes the system doesn't allow them to be, or conventions don't allow them to be, or the education system hasn't allowed them to be, or given them the permission to kind of tap into this essence that they have. And I think the more that people are provided with that permission and the more that they can relate and the more they're like, no, but this is it. I see myself in this. And I think more and more people are seeing themselves in this. But this just makes sense. And so that makes me optimistic because it's really resonating. And I think it's resonating because we're all innately good people. It's just we need to have the opportunity to be good.
to really harness it. I mean, it really, really resonated with me, the book, and it leaves you feeling positive. And I think we're all so challenged at the moment and so feeling like I don't have power and I don't have a way to change this or do something positive. So we all feel a little bit helpless. And I think the really lovely thing about the book is it gives you that permission.
Totally.
And also the small things, and because there is some challenging things in there, and it's certainly, our conversation about the polarities, it made me question myself and think, yeah, I'm definitely sitting on the side thinking, well, they're wrong and I'm right. And I need to challenge that way of thinking. And I think that was a really important thing for me.
But it's
that I took away from
easy
the
to
book.
do that, right? Like we are all guilty of it. And the thing is I'm not even suggesting like I have all the answers or I'm perfect or that person's perfect. No one is perfect. But I think we just need to have that constant reminder of, again, putting ourselves in check and be like, okay, how am I showing up? Like how we started the conversation. Am I asking enough questions? Hold on a second. That probably wasn't very good. Let me try that again. And I think we just need to remind ourselves, because the more that everyone just kind of, and also I love that you got that out of the book, because I genuinely believe it. It's sort of, we all have so much more power than we think we do. And if everyone just taps into that just a little bit, everybody, the world would be such a different place, because it's not passively going through life or passively thinking, oh, I can't. No, like it's so tangible and it's so easy. Again, it's just permission. And I hope that the book gives people permission.
I think we should end it there because that was such a positive note to end on. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's so
pleasure
nice
to read the book and pleasure to get to know you.
Thank you for reading the book. Thank you for having me. It's a huge honor. So thank you.